Welcome back, everyone. In this video, we're going to talk about Hasselblad lenses. This is the 25V, and about a month ago when this came out and was announced, I did a first look video on this. It's a lens that I've really been enjoying using. It is absolutely phenomenal. But when I did that video, in fact, anytime I do a Hasselblad video, I end up getting a lot of questions, and so I wanted to address some of those in this video, and I want to talk about some of the differences in the wide-angle prime lenses that Hasselblad have to offer. So inevitably, the first and most often asked question that I get about Hasselblad lenses is about availability, because what'll happen is these lenses come out and they're kind of out of stock at Hasselblad's website and B&H and all those places, and people get very frustrated because they can't get their hands on them or find them in stock. And all I can say to you guys is you really do need to pre-order these lenses if that's what you want. They come in small batches. Hasselblad as a company is not as big as Nikon, Sony, Canon. They do not produce lenses in the volume that those companies do. They're one of the two European companies. You've got Leica and Hasselblad, and the way it works is they work things in smaller numbers. Now, I think the good side of all that is that when they are out of stock and they do sell out really quickly, that's a good sign for Hasselblad, and it shows the popularity of the products. But if you do, in fact, want to get one of these lenses, it is best to pre-order it. You'll probably have to wait just a little while before you get it sent, but that at least puts your place in line. So I wanted to address that because I always get asked about that. All right, so another question that I get asked a lot about is we have the original Hasselblad X2D lenses. Now we have the V-series lenses and we have the P-series lenses. What is the difference between those? Okay, so let's start with the P lenses. In fact, just to give you a general overview of everything, when the X2D mount came out in 2016, that was Hasselblad's foray into mirrorless medium format. Before that, we had the H system and the older cameras, and in the digital realm, those were still mirror cameras. They were SLRs. So this was their first mirrorless camera. So when they originally came out, there was an original set of lenses, and they really didn't have any designation to them. They're really good lenses, all of them. And so I would say a couple of years ago, Hasselblad came out with the first lens in the series, which was the 45P. Now the 45P, P stands for portable, so the lens is smaller and it comes in at a much more affordable price point. So what do you give up with a P lens? Well, you really don't give up any compatibility. It's still an X2D mount lens. It just has that designation because the P lenses will cap out at about f4. In fact, they cap out at exactly f4. All of them are f4 lenses. There are two in the lineup right now, the 45P and the 28P. So you can see they are smaller as a result, and a lot of that has to do with a lower maximum aperture. Now, they're still very great lenses. You still can get bokeh, you can still get shallow depth of field. It's just not as shallow or as separated out as you're going to get with the 2.5 lenses. So that is the biggest difference in those. So everything is the same mount that we're talking about. They're all compatible, and those are the big differences. With the P line, all of a sudden we have a line of lenses, and I would imagine there's going to be more down the road. Hasselblad really don't do roadmaps anymore, but that's the designation of the P lenses. They are portable. Then we have the V series of lenses, and the V stands for versatile. The V series of lenses debuted when the X2D was released last year, and we had three of them that came out at that time that were announced. We had the 38, the 55, and the 90V. So those are all V lenses. V stands for versatile, and these all have a wider maximum aperture of f2.5. As a result, they are going to be bigger lenses, but the image quality is going to be considerably higher as well. You're able to get more glass in here. The idea is not to just build a portable lens, it's to build a versatile lens, and so that's what the V stands for. The other big designation with the V lenses is that you do have the clutch system for manual focus on all the Vs, so I can basically just go into manual focus by sliding that forward. And then you do have your depth of field scale. You have hard stops, even though it is focused by wire, at the ends. So if you want to get to minimum focus or the maximum focus distance, it's really easy to do that. So that's another big difference between the V and the P, and then just the original X2D lenses that were released. And of course, all of these lenses that we're talking about, the original lenses, the P lenses, and the V lenses, are all X2D lenses, which means they're compatible with the mirrorless Hasselblad. So this started with the X1D. We move forward, they're compatible with everything all the way up to the X2D and everything that's going to be in this system to come. They're also compatible with the 907X, which has the removable back. This is the modular camera system. And I say this because this gets confusing to people too, because we tend to refer to these as V systems. So it makes it sound like only the V lenses will work on the V system, and that is not accurate. They will work on any of the Hasselblad mirrorless cameras. It's all the same mount. Another thing that I want to point out about all of these lenses is that the design when Hasselblad went to mirrorless, they've always been known for using leaf shutters in their system. And the reason for this is because Hasselblad have a long history of being studio cameras, is that you can get flash sync all the way up to the highest shutter speed. It doesn't cap out at 1/250th of a second. So that means if I have a lens that can go all the way to 1/4000th of a second, I can flash sync at at all of those shutter speeds. That is important to know. The leaf shutter lives in the lens, so each one of these lenses contains a shutter. And so a focal plane shutter lives in the body and it sits right over the focal plane, whereas these are a little bit different. They live inside the lens. So that's another thing to know about all the lenses that we're talking about. With the release of the 25V, you can now see that Hasselblad has a really strong lineup when it comes to wide-angle primes. And I want to talk about some of the differences between these because people will ask, well, which is the best? Which one do you prefer? So we're dealing basically on the wide end with 3 primes right now. We're going to be talking about the 25V, we're going to be talking about the 28P, as well as the 38V, which came out last year. All of these are incredible lenses. Let's start with the 38V. So the 38V, or the 38mm lens, remember this is medium format, so the full frame equivalent would be about 30mm. It has a 70-degree field of view. This is a very efficiently designed lens, I think. The maximum aperture, it's a V lens, so it's f2.5. Features 10 elements in 9 groups, and weighs in at about 12.3 ounces, or 350 grams, and the internal leaf shutter goes up to 1/2000th of a second. In my experience, the 38V is very usable. It's a really, really nice lens, and it is sharp. You get an extraordinary level of detail, even wide open. Field curvature is extremely well controlled, and I think this is a really versatile lens. This is one that you would be able to use easily for street photography, for architecture. It's not as wide as the lenses we're going to talk about today, so it's a little more narrow. I think it's going to give you an enormous amount of versatility. I absolutely love the 38V. So the next widest lens would be the 28P, P standing for portable. This is a very small lens. Maximum aperture is f4. It features 9 elements in 8 groups, and it weighs in at a mere 8.6 ounces, or 245 grams. This lens would be a 22mm equivalent on full frame, so it has an 89-degree field of view. The internal leaf shutter will sync all the way up to 1/4000th of a second. And of the 3 wides, this I would argue is the one that I tend to carry with me the most. Now here's the deal. With f4, you're going to be giving up a little bit of light. You're going to be giving up that really shallow depth of field. However, at this wide an angle, I'm not really concerned with having a really shallow depth of field, so f4 is just fine for me. I would also argue that if you have the X2D, you have in-body image stabilization, which is absolutely fantastic. So if I'm going to be out and about, in other words, I'm not in the studio, this is the lens I tend to prefer for my wide, because that P means it's going to be smaller, it's going to be very portable, and it's just less to carry, and the image quality is fantastic. And of course, we've got the 25V that I did a video on recently. This is going to be the widest of the primes that we're talking about in this video. The 25V is going to be a full frame equivalent of about 19mm. So you've got a really wide field of view at 95 degrees. This is actually the largest lens in the V series. It's got 13 elements in 10 groups. It weighs in at 1.3 pounds, or 592 grams. So you can see it's considerably heavier, but still manageable. It is worth it for the image quality on this. Maximum aperture is f2.5, of course. Another thing that I want to mention about all the lenses that we're looking at here, and I think that Hasselblad's engineers have done a really nice job about this, they all have the same filter threading of 72mm. Why is that important? Well, if you're out and about and you've got a bunch of lenses with you, you don't have to bring multiple filter sets or adapters to adapt filters to different size lenses. It's all the same. It's 72mm across the board. Nice touch. And of course, another lens that I at least want to mention is the older 21mm lens. This is a really wide angle lens. The full frame equivalent is about 17mm. I reviewed that lens when it came out as one that I've never owned. I have rented it on occasion, and it doesn't make as much sense for me to own personally. And the reason I say that is because I tend to shoot 50mm and out. And so when I go with wide angle lenses, I'm using them a lot less. And an ultra wide angle like that, I just use the least. Now, having said that, is when you need that lens, you need that lens. And so I do rent that when I need it. And it is an excellent lens, despite it being slightly a little bit older than the others. But I did want to mention that just because it exists and I wanted to stay consistent. Now, with the newer lenses, the V series and the P series, I get asked a lot which one I recommend for somebody who wants to get into this system. And I think that it really is going to come down to your needs as a photographer. Everybody's a little different, so it's hard for me to make just a recommendation saying I like this one the best. The other thing that I think is important to realize, that even though these are all wide angle lenses, especially the 25 and the 28, it's really easy to look at those and say, oh, well, those are so close in focal length, it doesn't matter. And actually, when you get into wide angles, and that's why I mentioned the field of view when I mentioned all of these examples, because it does get radically different. There is a big difference between a 28 and a 25, especially when we're talking about medium format. I also want to talk about crop factor for a second, because it's a little bit different when we get into medium format. So with full frame mirrorless, we're dealing with the classic 35mm 2:3 aspect ratio on all of your shots. You can crop and post to whatever you want, but that's what the camera camera natively shoots. The medium format cameras natively shoot a 645 format, so it's a little more like a 4x3. It's a little bit different than 35 millimeters. So depending on what you want to do, these cameras, and Hasselblad has always been in a position with studio cameras where cropping probably is going to happen. That's why they're really high megapixel. That's why they also offer all these internal crop modes on the camera that I end up using quite a bit. I love the X-band format. I will shoot that. I always shoot RAW on these cameras, and what I love is that it brings in the crop when you go into Lightroom or Focus or whatever software you're using, but it saves all the raw data also. So if I want to recrop it or if I want to do something different with it, I certainly have that as an option. The other crop modes that I use a lot, because I come from a 35 millimeter background and I'm so used to that aspect ratio, is I will actually do a 2:3 aspect ratio internally in the camera. There's two ways you can handle this. The first one is to use the full width of the sensor, and it just crops the top and the bottom, so you kind of have a crop factor for full frame there. The other way you can do it is actually crop in on the sensor, so it is exactly what you would get on a full frame, and it's a higher megapixel count. You get a 66 megapixel image when you do that. Of course, you shoot RAW, and it does save all the data that is cropped out, so if you want to recrop it later, that is certainly a possibility. That's one of the things that I love about these cameras. So when we talk about the crop factor, on medium format right now with these cameras, it's 0.79. That's going to be what you multiply to get to your focal length equivalent for full frame because it's larger. But it just depends on what it is that you're doing with it. And so that's another thing that I want to say. So having said that, you get a lot of versatility out of all these lenses. And of course, if you get serious about the Hasselblad system, I think owning all these is actually pretty important. The 38V is an incredible lens. I think there's a reason that I use the 28P quite a bit, and it's because it's portable and I can carry that around. I've been doing a whole series of images. We have an art museum here in Fort Worth that was designed by Tadao Ando, who's the famous Japanese architect from Osaka. It's a beautiful building, and I love the fact that he works in this big concrete gray structure, but then when you have people and art in the images, they really just kind of contrast in such this beautiful way. And so I've been shooting that a lot. And one thing I take over there, just because it's lightweight and it's easy and I can just throw it in a bag and go, is the 28P. That's kind of my go-to lens for something like that. However, if you're shooting something more specific and you want a higher image quality than what the P lens is going to give you, or you need that wider aperture, then I think either of the V lenses are the way to go. So I hope that answers more questions than it creates. But anyway, if you guys have any further questions on Hasselblad or its system, please drop them in the comments below. I will see you guys in the next video. Until then, later.